On this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, we talk to Stephen Keech. You might know Stephen as maybe the front man for the band Haze the Day, but today we actually talk about his foray into the world of sync licensing. After his band broke up, he needed a way to stay in music and create an income, and he started getting into the sync licensing world, microsyncs, and then developing a name for himself in there and moving on to custom sync work for TV and film. So today we talk about everything from getting into it to honing your craft to how to make yourself sellable as a sync license composer. Stephen also has the Modern Composer, which is a website and a podcast that helps you get your stuff placement ready. Now, unfortunately, we had a little bit of recording issues, so a little bit of the end of the conversation actually got cut off, but none of the great sync license conversation got lost. So I'm going to just kind of edit this all together into a slightly tighter episode than usual. But without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Stephen Keech of the Modern Composer.
Welcome to the Home Studio Hangout podcast, where we explore what it's like building, running, and working out of a home studio with your hosts, Joshua Matotek, Andrew Simmons, and many guests in different areas of the music industry.
Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I am your host, Drew, here with my co-host, Josh. Say hi to the people, Josh.
Hi.
And today we have Stephen Keech on from your podcast and all of your sync stuff. It's called Modern Composer, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure I got that right because I tried to Google you, and then when you type in Modern Composer, it comes up with a bunch of modern composers, which, to be fair, that's on me for not putting that's on me for not putting the in front of it.
Right.
But previous life, you were in some bands, you did some music stuff, did some production stuff, and that's really cool. But I would love for you to give the people who may not know what you do now a little bit of insight into what that is, what Modern Composer is.
Yeah, so the Modern Composer is something that I started to help producers and composers get into licensing their music for film, TV, and media. And it's something that has been a big part of what I do for what I've done for the last 7 years or so. The Modern Composer is something that I put together to teach producers and musicians and composers how to get their music on films, TV, and media so that they can kind of make a passive income. And then if they want to, they can transition their whole career into just doing that.
A lot of sync
Very
licensing and things like that in that world that I think a lot of people, there's a lot of question marks about it, right? I think it's a lot of producers like want to do it, but have no know-how or how to even get into that world really at all. Is that kind of what you saw in your experience?
Yeah, I have a few, living in Nashville, I have so many musician friends. And I remember what got the gears going was I hit up one of my friends who was releasing like a ton of music on Spotify, like just had all this lo-fi hip hop stuff. And I was like, hey man, are you licensing this? And he was like, no, I haven't signed up for ASCAP yet. And I was like, wait, no. Are you licensing it for film and media? And he was like, which first of all, if you're writing music and releasing it at all, sign up for your PRO, like, make sure
100%.
You are getting paid your performance royalties, all that stuff. Don't sleep on that because you're going to be losing money, period. You're going to be losing half of your streaming income if you don't.
Yeah. I'd also like to add in that BMI just got bought by like a joint venture investor company thing. So if you haven't signed up for one yet, definitely go with ASCAP.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that was just news a couple weeks ago. We haven't talked about it on the podcast yet, but
we haven't.
It's kind of scary.
Update.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't yet and you're listening, sign up for ASCAP instead of BMI. It's like $50. Or no, they made it free now after that news was announced.
That's crazy. So, yeah, I mean, ASCAP has been good to me. It's easy to navigate.
Yeah, same. And, they're great.
But anyway, yeah, I was asking this guy, and he was like, no, had no idea what any of that was. And I was like, you're already making the music, make the money as well. Like, because, you know, anyone who's released music on Spotify or streaming, like, it's not going to sustain you unless you're getting on huge playlists and getting millions of streams. And even then, like, what, 1 million streams is $5,000 or something like that. And if you have a label, then they're going to get half of that or 75% of that. And if, you know, it's just not viable. So
it also requires a lot of the social growth part of it as well, as far as like running social media accounts and pushing it through those channels and or paying to have your stuff pitched and playlisted and, you know, that whole game as well on top of that.
Yeah, running ads for your music, which is funny because that like kind of just turns into a wash, or you spend more money on ads than you get on streams in return. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I just got the gears turning. I was like, man, I really need to like educate my friends on how to actually make money in this way. If you're already making music, if that's something that you love doing and you're producing it at a quality that is like, you know, good, then you should be submitting to these libraries, because we're talking, it's like to me, it's the only real way to make passive income as a musician. Like, I mean, there's education, of course, but, you know, licensing music, it's all over everything. We're in an age right now where like media is just exploding. I mean, social media, every big company is doing, you know, expanding their marketing budgets for, you know, media, for video content.
Yeah. So, short form content hasn't really been properly monetized from a marketing standpoint. Like, marketing dollars haven't been pushed into it. You can see a similar thing on how they treated YouTube in like 10 years ago, probably when they first kind of opened the floodgates of marketing dollars into YouTube. It was a slow trickle because companies weren't sure how to do it. Companies weren't sure how to partner. Companies weren't sure how to run ads on those platforms. Now we're in that exact same place with short form content, because companies are just now learning how to really make ads for that are like optimized, how to really like put the correct amount of money into it, and also see a good return on investment.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, micro licensing. So, there's basically the traditional form of licensing where you've got a music supervisor for a television show going to a sync company, licensing company through email or whatever. There might be a big email list, and they're sending out, hey, we're looking for tracks that are like this. And then those sync companies are going to go to their artists and say, hey, do you have any tracks like this? Can you make something really, really fast? And they're going to browse through their library, and they're going to make a playlist, send it into the music supervisor. The music supervisor is going to listen to all that stuff and decide on which track is going to get licensed for the television show. Then you have micro licensing, which is taking advantage of this whole social media short form content thing that's been happening over the last 10 years, growing and growing and growing, where, you know, you have companies like Soundstripe and Artlist, and they're licensing music at a way cheaper price, but they're licensing way more of it. Right. So like it's made it available to people who are hobbyists and people with lower budgets. And it's, I remember, I'm kind of jumping around here, but I remember when I started at Soundstripe. So I worked for a company called Soundstripe for a long time, and I was there from the very beginning before they even came up with the name Soundstripe. And I remember when they were making that transition from like pay per license going into the micro licensing space. And they told us it was going to be $20 a month. And we were like, what? Like, aren't you like devaluing our music? They're like, and I remember sitting down with the founders and they broke down the math. And they were like, this is what it takes to acquire a $20 a month customer. But once we hit this number of customers and you're getting this many downloads, this is how much you'll make. And it was ridiculous. The promise of it was like way more ridiculous. Now, when the company was really small, we were seeing like, oh yeah, in like 5 years, we could be making like $500,000 a year. But then of course, companies being companies need to have a profit themselves. So of course they changed their pay model to where it was like, yeah, no, you're not going to get $500,000 a year. But yeah, it was, it's a really interesting transition that the sync companies were kind of moving towards that. And so now, with all of that said, it's just easier than ever to get your music into one of those libraries or a bunch of those libraries and make passive income from it.
Yeah, we've talked with some friends that do sync licensing before. Our friend Enoch worked for a company that did some cool stuff in the micro sync licensing space. And then I have a friend named Brian Lau, him and his wife, Sydney. They're up in Nashville, but they do some really great stuff with sync and he's seen the, like, doing, I think what we were talking about before we started recording, which was like, he's a producer, but he fills that in between gap with sync licensing music. Like, he and I work on stuff together, and then we'll split stuff. He and whoever will work on things together, and they'll split stuff. Or he'll, if he's got an artist or a song with an artist that he thinks might work, he'll, take that and kind of pitch it, because I think he works with a more traditional like sync house as well on top of his other work, which I know can look a little bit different. So maybe a really good way to start the sync conversation is maybe explaining the differences. And I know you kind of talked about it a little bit just now, but like explaining in more detail the differences between like what you do versus maybe traditional sync. And do you kind of dip your hand in both, or is it you really just lean towards one or the other?
Yeah, I do dip into both. What I found about traditional sync is that it's more, they're looking for artists for the most part. So if you're an artist out there and you're writing music, vocal music, singer-songwriter stuff, and that's easy for you to write and easy for you to write based on a theme or a brief, then that's where you need to pursue. Basically, like my experience with that is it's a lot more relational. So it's less like you're going to go to a website and upload your music, and more so you're going to have an email relationship with somebody who's going to go to bat for your music. And they might have a much smaller roster, but they're going to be, they're going to be getting syncs on television shows and movies, sometimes commercials, but for the most part, it's like straight to TV, straight to movies.
Yeah, I think most of my friend Ryan's are Netflix, straight to Netflix stuff.
And what's cool about that is that you're going to have a higher sync fee, and you're also going to have a much better back end, so as it plays over and over again, you're going to get more money in your PRO. So as far as micro licensing, the way that works from the artist perspective is most of the time it's a lot less relational. You're probably not going to have like an A&R. You might, depending on the company, and it might just be like an email blast or something like, where they're just telling you, hey, actually we need some music kind of like this, if anybody wants to make it. But that's going to be more like you upload your music onto the website. It's got to go through an approval process, and then it'll end up on the site. And with that, with any of these companies, you've got non-exclusive deals and exclusive deals, both have their benefits, non-exclusive deal, you can throw your music all over the place. And an exclusive deal, they're your exclusive representative in sync. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit more. With the micro licensing side of things, so you're going to a company like an Artlist or a Soundstripe
Right.
or something, and you're signing up, you're pitching your songs. Now, how many, I would say, let's talk about quantity here. Obviously, quality level, there's like a baseline, but once you kind of reach that baseline, like what does quantity look like for you?
Well, I'll say this. You're not going to make a living off of 10 songs. Like, just not the way it works. In either of these areas. So either traditional sync or micro licensing, you're not going to make a living off 10 songs. So quantity, like if you can get, 5 tracks out a month for a few years, then you can, what is that? 5 times 12. I'm terrible at math.
Oh God.
Musicians and math.
Yeah, I don't know, man. 60.
Okay.
60
maybe.
So you've got that, and then the next year you got 120, and then so on and so forth. And once you start, because you don't really know which one's going to hit, you have no idea. A few will hit, maybe all of them will do pretty well, and then a few will just not see the light of day. It's just the way of the business. So the more little workers that you have out there, like your tracks are little workers and they're making money for you, the more you have out there, the more money you're bringing home. It's not a like get rich quick situation, and it's not a situation where you're going to make one hit song and everyone's going to love it and give you a bunch of money for it. It's just not going to happen. At least you can't count on it. It does happen.
Sure. But it's the 1% of the situation, more likely. So would you recommend for somebody starting out in this world, how would you recommend somebody get into this? So maybe talk to it from like a producer who's making some stuff on the side, some beats, or has some extra free time. They're trying to like go full time. They still want to do production, but they see this as an option to maybe get them over that hump or through that wall of being able to go like full-time music.
Yeah.
How would you direct that person?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing, and always the first step, is do your research. Go look up those licensing companies. Find the ones that are putting out music that most align to what you do easily, quickly, naturally, that are, your personal expressive voice. What companies are doing that, or what companies are maybe lacking in that? Like maybe you could fill a hole in that library that, they don't have a whole lot of hip hop or something, and maybe they're looking for that. And start there, research, listen to the top tracks on the platform, listen through to the different genres and the mood tags. And a lot of times they'll have playlists that are like staff picks. That's a great place to start, because obviously if the staff is excited about it, then you're a lot more likely to get onto the platform. So do your research, make a list of companies that you want to pitch your music to, and then write for that company. Like write with that company in mind. Like, how can I serve this company? Because the harsh truth about licensing music is that you have your artists and your artistic expression, right? And then you have licensing music. Now you need to bridge the gap somewhere. You need to bring this artist side of your brain into the licensing format, but you're still serving a client. You're still writing music that serves a purpose. And that, of course, I don't ever want to discount the artistic side of it, because you need to put your creativity into it. And you need to stand out by, putting your own voice into it. However, You're still serving a client. So start with what the client wants, what the client needs, and serve that. And then, come up with 3 tracks, just a simple EP, and make sure it looks good, make sure it sounds good, make sure the 3 songs that you have written are all in the same genre, and fit together, like they don't have to be exactly the same, of course, but you want them to have a bit of a theme, so that when the company listens to your music, they're like, oh, this serves this purpose and I get it. If you have like one folk song and one hip hop song and, a metal song or whatever, it's like, they'll be like, oh, well, we don't really understand exactly what you do. They don't understand the product. So you kind of have to lay the product out, your music out like a product, so that people understand exactly what it is that you do, exactly what it is that this product is going to do in their catalog. And then you follow all the rules for submission. So they're going to have it listed out on their website. This is how you submit. This is what we want. There's going to be some steps that you'll need to follow, and follow them very closely. If you mess up, that's the first red flag on their side. So just pay attention to the instructions and do what they ask you to do. And then the final thing that I would say to somebody trying to get into that today is, don't be offended if they say no. Don't worry about it, because honestly, people say no to me all the time. Like that is part of the business. And
yeah, I feel like, especially in sync, it's like partially a numbers game, where it's like you can only do so much. Like, it's not like it's a super controlled environment. Like, you don't actually know what they want aside from, the words that they have to offer. So, it's really just about like doing the best that you can do, and like just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that whoever's listening to these and sorting through them, is kind of looking for that particular thing that you also heard in your head whenever they mentioned those words,
Exactly. I mean, music is relative to the listener, right? Like you have to be in the right mental headspace to understand what the music is saying at that time. And some people can see through that more and some people can't. And you never really know. I don't know if you've read the book Big Magic.
No, who's that
Elizabeth
by?
Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. But this book, Big Magic, I suggest it to any creative person. It is foundational, honestly. It's beautiful. It's a very interesting way to understand creativity. But anyway, in that book, she talks about how she wrote this short story and was submitting it to all these publishers, right? And she remembers vividly submitting it to one particular publisher that she really wanted to get published by, and the publisher turned her down. Said, the story doesn't have a good ending. Basically, I don't like it. Like, keep trying. I think she said it was like maybe 5 or 10 years later or something like that. She had an agent who was pitching all of her material, and she pitched this same unedited short story to this same publisher. And that same publisher replied back immediately, loved the story, said she loved the ending. Like, you never know, because maybe that was the 100th story she had read in that day, the first time she read it, and she was like, her brain was broken or whatever, and was just like over it. I know that like I'll be working on a track, and at the end of the day, I'm like hungry and tired, and I think everything sounds like dog crap. And then I go back to it the next day, and I'm like, oh no, it's all good.
Or the fatal opposite happens. Like,
and it is
great. And then like you're on your way to go get a cup of coffee in the morning. You're like, oh, I'm going to listen to that song. And you're like, all right, maybe I'll listen after I get my coffee. And then you get your coffee, and then you listen to it again. And you're like, no, this is still just the worst thing I've ever made. I'll uninstall Pro Tools.
Why would I do this to myself?
Yeah, why would I do this?
It's true. You never know.
Yeah, you never
whatever
know.
mood you're in, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I've had similar things happen with artists, you know, where it's like we're working on like a lot of my work kind of happens you know, in the room. So like we'll be sitting there writing the song. They'll be like, hey, I don't really like that vibe. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And we'll change it. And then once I get down to like actually producing it after the fact, I'll reintroduce whatever the initial vision was that they wanted changed, just to be like, hear me out. Okay. Like, I think you just need to actually listen to it instead of this like super rough thing that we were just putting together in a hurry. And like 9 times out of 10, they're like, no, this is awesome. This is exactly what we needed. And I think it's just like the context, you know, like sometimes, you know, like there's the aspect of like, if people can't actually hear the full idea, then they won't get it, you know? And then there's also like the whole thing of words only say so much in music, you know? And I think that that's like a pretty relevant concept to all that, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's another good point. Is this majoritively instrumental music, or is this a little bit of instrumental and vocal, or kind of mishmash of both?
Like I said, so most of what I do is instrumental. I dabble in vocal music, but it bogs down my workflow, and I don't find as much joy in it. I feel like I'd rather, if I'm going to use my voice, I'd rather it be more for an artistic expression rather than, you know, for the machine.
Makes sense.
However, it can be either. I mean, it depends on the library, and it depends on the agent, the sync agent. Like I said before, traditional sync definitely lends more to artists and singer-songwriters, you know, people who are doing vocal music. And a lot of times, it's funny, man, you start to realize like a lot of times the vocal doesn't even get used. Like,
or just like
one line,
a piece of the vocal. Yeah. They just want that one line to like, so that's the funny thing. So my buddy that got placed on Netflix, it was for a Virgin River episode. It was like the finale, and it was his wife's song that got placed. And it was literally just like because of one line that just worked in that moment, in that scene, and like the climax scene or whatever. It's like, that's why they picked it. So it ramped up, and they said that one, they sang that one line, and then it went right away. And I was like, daggum.
Yeah. I mean, you never know what's going to get used. It's just like whatever they need in that one little section.
Yeah. The most tragic instance, I think, of vocals in sync is I was playing, I think it was NHL 2021. And like the soundtrack is public, you know, like you could figure out what songs are on it. There was this one song that would play right before a game starts every once in a while. It was so good. And I was like, this song is incredible. I need to know who did it. I tried Shazamming it. I went on multiple deep dives. Reddit didn't have an answer. And you know, it's bad when Reddit doesn't have an answer. So the only thing I could think of is it was one of the sync songs that they got for that video game. And I am so bummed out because I love that song. And like, it wouldn't play, like the soundtrack would play while you're in like the menu screens and stuff like that. But while like in between periods and stuff like that, it was definitely sync music because none of it was on the soundtrack. And that bumped me out so bad. I was like, why would you guys license such a good song whenever you could have just released it? So then that way I could at least hopefully find it on a playlist somewhere.
I mean, I'm guilty of that for sure. There's a few songs. I have one song in particular that's like, I've never released it anywhere. It was on Soundstripe for a while, and it was like, it was a vocal song. I wrote it years ago, and it's this like kind of alt country type song. You know, Ryan Adams before he got canceled, kind of thing. I never released it anywhere, and I keep getting messages like every like 3 months I'll get a message that's like, where can I find this song, like on Instagram. I'm like, oh, well, I don't think I'm gonna release it. here's the MP3. Like,
yeah,
but like, it's also not really my vibe. And I know it's a good song, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not really your
my thing, and I don't really.
So that's actually kind of interesting. Are you? I guess now. Earlier on, I'm sure you were throwing paint at the wall when it came to sync. As far as sync music, you were trying to find like what, not only what you liked, but like what worked at the same time. You know. So talk about like maybe that part, and then how you kind of found, what was it like finding like what you would consider like your thing when it comes to sync.
Yeah. So I had a unique situation. I went on staff as a staff composer at Sounds Right for 4 years. And that's a unique position because I did 8 tracks a month for those 4 years. And I could, for the most part, I was doing some like, and towards the end, it was a lot of music requests, and they didn't start the music requests until about halfway through my job there. I could just pick whatever I wanted, whatever I thought would license well, whatever I was in the mood to make. And so I got to experiment with like a ton of stuff. I had 11 different monikers, or 12 maybe. I got to experiment in all the different genres. I mean, I wrote like epic orchestral stuff, and I wrote, the Strokes kind of indie rock stuff. And I wrote, minimalist composer, kind of new classical music. And first of all, I learned a ton. I mean, when you're writing and producing 8 tracks a month consistently for a long time, it's in different genres. You're just
at a high quality level.
At a very, I mean, your quality has to be high. And of course, like there's a kind of a mental thing where it's like, oh, somebody's paying me a good salary to write this stuff, so I need to like actually make it good. And also you're shooting for job security and all that stuff.
For sure.
Because it's not a common position.
For
staff
sure.
composer, it doesn't really.
That's incredibly rare.
It's insanely rare, and I have never seen it before that, and I haven't seen it since. I was very lucky in that way that I got to experiment with all kinds of genres, and it was very clear, I think, the stuff that I was drawn to. And there's this temptation in the beginning, I think, to like do the stuff that you hate because you know it works. And I would recommend that if you're starting out now, don't do that. Like, just don't. Like, don't do the stuff that you hate. Like, because once you get a big catalog of music, like that's what you're known for. And people will start to seek you out to do the stuff that you hate doing. And that is not a viable career.
We were talking about the same thing with our friend Aaron. You know, he was like, in a lot of ways, like I'm still just kind of known as the metal guy, but I feel like I'm way better at pop music, and he is. He's like, so good.
Pop, he's fantastic at all.
Yeah, and we were talking about how we both had similar situations where we were like complaining about this. We're like, man, we're getting hired for this, and we don't want to do it, and all this, and we're complaining to our girlfriends, and then they just stop and they go, "Have you ever thought about just not doing it?" And it's like, oh yeah, I can actually just like not do it. That's the thing I can do, is just not. And so it's funny that you brought that up, because it doesn't change. It doesn't change, And I mean,
regardless of industry.
Right. Yeah, I was about to say that. Regardless of industry, I know Maddie has dealt with that with being into graphic design, where it's just like I could just like not do this and do a different thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's so funny that we like, it's like we think that we have more value if we do the crap that we hate. And it's just not true, like,
no, it's not true. If you hate it, you aren't going to do as good of a job. No, you're not. Regardless of how happy or how little mixed notes or, whatever, like, it doesn't matter if you're able to send a rough of, this genre that you hate and the artist signs off on it and they're paying you more than, you know, the artist that you really love. But like, you're going to make better art with the one that you love. And then you're going to end up getting more work. And eventually you're going to be making way more and doing much more fulfilling work, you know?
Yes. I mean, so like mostly what I do now, I do licensing music still, but the majority of my income comes from custom music. So like scoring commercials and films and documentaries and stuff like
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I have a friend who does that out in LA, and he got into it because he was developing artists back in the 90s, like metal bands. And so like back then he was able to like contact a studio and be like, hey, I'd like to spec like these days in the studio. And the studio's like, all right, cool. And then he'd show up with the band and they make a killer record, and then he would send it to a bunch of A&Rs, and then he'd get them signed, and then he'd make, you know, $250,000 or whatever. Sweet. And then
pay everybody out. Yep.
Yeah, and it was sick. And then like LimeWire and Napster came out, and he was like, oh man, like it's
I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. And then like the rock wave was kind of dying, and he was like, I don't know what I should do. And he accidentally got into sync, and you know, I finally got to meet him last time I was in LA, and we were hanging out, and he was like, yeah, I'm doing this thing for Hulu. And he was showing me it, and I was like, this is so cool. Like, he just wakes up and he gets to like watch a cool movie or documentary or whatever, and then like make music for it. And I don't know, it's just it's really cool, like hearing like how people get into it. Cause like, you know, there's never one like repetitive story. You know? The more people that
it's like, and especially now, I mean, there used to be the normal way, like the old way where people would get into it, where you go and you assist a composer in Hollywood, or you like start out as an intern and you're sweeping floors and getting coffee and stuff like that. And then you work your way up to where like maybe you get to score a couple of the cues as like a ghost writer, and they're not going to give you credit, and they're going to pay you minimum wage or whatever. And then maybe if the composer's busy when a project comes along, they might pass it down to you. So that was like the old way, from what I understand. Now it's like, do whatever you want. You know, a filmmaker, then score their film. You know, it's like, licensing,
even with video games, it's like that.
Oh now. Yeah. I mean, it basically. So licensing music I was doing the custom thing a little bit before I started doing licensing music. I was dabbling in it, but I wasn't making a good income doing it. I was mostly producing bands at the time, and then shifted into licensing music. And because of the sheer amount of music that I have in my preferred genre, that I like making music in, because of that, because I have hundreds of tracks in that genre, filmmakers are discovering me on sites and reaching out to me to score their next documentary or whatever it is. So it's like,
that is so cool,
it's a way not only that you can make passive income, but also get discovered by the people you want to work with in the future, you know,
while you make money.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the biggest incentives to start out doing what you want to do. And you might have to, like, I'm not talking about like write whatever you want and hopefully it will work in sync. You still have to play by the rules, and you still have to like make it good quality and make it work for a specific purpose, but like do it in the genre that you want to make music in, that inspires you the most, because down the line, someone's going to discover you for that. And
I was going to say, what is your preferred, like now? Like what is the thing that you are doing now that you are like, this is my thing and this is my pop?
Yeah. I would say in that cinematic, ambient, to epic, genre.
Okay.
Is
so orchestral based things,
orchestral, and then, you know, that cinematic genre can go into post rock. It can morph into ambient, like synth ambient, like so. I think the most important thing for me is that it has emotion, that it like it has it pulls me into a feeling or into a state of mind. And it's something that I've always loved about music. And, not all of my music is super licensable. I think I said it in a podcast recently that like a lot of times you want to dial back your emotion to get more syncs because the super sad kids songs are not going to really sync well all the time. But yeah, I still drive the needle that way because it's what gets me excited.
Thank you so much again to Stephen for coming on the podcast and having this really great conversation, opening our eyes a little bit more into the world of sync. If this is something you are interested in, go check him out at themoderncomposer.com. And if you want to follow him on socials, he is at Stephen Keech or at The Modern Composer on Instagram. So go give him a follow. Go tell him that you heard about him from the podcast. He'll be glad to say what's up. Once again, we're grateful for Stephen for coming on the show. We're grateful for you for listening. And we will see you in the next one. See ya.